The empty chairs in the front row cost $150 a plate, but the silence from my parents cost me a lifetime of waiting. They did not even know I had moved 3 states away because my brother consumed every ounce of their attention, standing alone in the bridal suite. I realized their absence was not a mistake. It was the longest, loudest confession they had ever made. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I stared at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the bridal suite, adjusting the silk line of my dress with hands that refused to tremble. I was 32 years old, the vice president of strategy at Northline Creative Labs, and a woman who had successfully built a fortress of indifference around her heart. Or at least, that was the lie I told myself as I looked past my reflection to the live feed of the ceremony hall on the monitor behind me. A hope. I checked my phone for the 10th time in the last 20 minutes. The screen remained dark. No missed calls. No frantic texts explaining a flight delay. No apologies. The everything was perfect. The floral arrangements were exactly the shade of dusty rose I had selected. The lighting was warm and forgiving. The guests were seated, a sea of supportive faces from my life here in Seattle. But my eyes were drawn like a magnet to the front row on the left side. There were 2 chairs draped in white linen, distinct from the others. They held small, elegant placards that read, "Reserved." They were the most expensive seats in the house, costing me not just $150 a plate, but a lifetime of futile silence was absolute. Outside the heavy oak door of the suite, I could hear the murmur of the string quartet starting their prelude, a sound that should have signaled joy, but instead sounded like a countdown to an execution. This was not new. The dynamic was as old as my memory served. My mind flashed back to the day I graduated summa cum laude from university. I had walked across the stage, scanning the crowd for my parents, only to find empty seats then, too. They had called me 3 days later. My brother, Tyler, had suffered a minor panic attack because he had failed a remedial math class, and they had spent the weekend consoling him at a lakeside cabin. "Eleanor, please understand," my mother had said, her voice devoid of actual apology. "Tyler is fragile. He needs us to hold him up. You are the strong one. You do not need us to watch you succeed because we already know you will." That sentence had become the architecture of my existence. I was the sturdy foundation that could be ignored. Tyler was the crumbling facade that required constant maintenance and funding. I had moved 3,000 miles away to escape that gravity, reinventing myself in a state where nobody knew the Brooks family drama. I sent them my new address on a card. I sent them an invitation to this wedding 6 months ago. I sent a reminder 2 months ago. The door clicked open, breaking my trance. Mark stepped in. He looked sharp in his charcoal suit, his presence grounding the room immediately. He did not ask if they were here. He did not offer empty platitudes about traffic or misunderstandings. Mark knew. He had seen the receipts of my therapy sessions. He had held me when the silence became too loud to sleep through. "They are not coming," Mark said. It was not a question. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "They are not. Do you want me to have the coordinator remove the chairs?" I looked back at the monitor. Removing the chairs would be hiding the truth. It would be pretending that we were a normal family, just missing a few members due to circumstance. Leaving them there was a statement. It was a monument to their choice. "No," I said, turning to face him. "Leave them. Let everyone see the gap." Mark nodded, his eyes filled with a respect that meant more to me than any parental praise. He held out his hand. "We are ready when you are." I took a breath, inhaling the scent of hairspray and expensive lilies. For 3 decades, I had waited to be seen by them. I had polished my achievements like trophies, hoping the glare would catch their eye. Today, the waiting ended. I realized that keeping those chairs empty was not about their absence anymore. It was about my presence. I was not walking down that aisle to be given away by a father who forgot my zip code. I was walking down it to claim the life I had built in spite of them. "I am ready," I said. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway alone. I did not cry. I did not look back at the phone on the vanity. The time for begging was over. If they wanted to see me now, they would have to look at the woman who learned to shine without their light. The music swelled, a cello suite that vibrated against the soles of my shoes as I walked down the aisle. Every step was a measured calculation, a rhythm I had perfected over 30 years of walking on eggshells. To the guests on my right, I was a blushing bride. To the empty space on my left, I was a ghost finally solidifying into flesh and bone. As I passed the third row, the scent of expensive perfume from a guest triggered a violent shift in my memory, pulling me out of the sanctuary and dropping me back into the living room of my childhood home. It was the year I turned 16. I sat at the kitchen table, the acceptance letter for the state summer leadership program smoothing out under my sweating palms. It was a prestigious honor, one that accepted only 5% of applicants across the room. My brother Tyler was sprawled on the sofa. He had just been suspended from school for the second time that semester for vandalism. "We just do not know what to do with his creative energy," my mother had sighed, stirring her tea. "He is just so misunderstood by the system." They spent $4,000 that summer on a specialized behavioral camp for Tyler, complete with horse therapy and mountain hiking, when I asked for $200 to cover the bus fare to my leadership program. My father frowned, checking his watch. "Eleanor, you know things are tight right now with your brother's situation," he said, not even looking me in the eye. "Can you not pick up extra shifts at the diner? You are so resourceful. We do not worry about you." Resourceful. That was the code word. It meant I required zero investment. I was the cactus in the corner of the room that survived on ambient moisture, while Tyler was the orchid that demanded a climate-controlled greenhouse. I took the extra shifts. I paid for the bus. I went to the program and won the top award. When I returned, placing the certificate on the fridge, my mother covered it 2 hours later with a reminder note for Tyler's dentist appointment. Back in the wedding hall, I reached the altar. Mark took my hand, his grip warm and dry. The physical contact snapped me back to the present, but the anger was a cold current running beneath my skin. I remembered the day I decided to leave. It was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow, suffocating realization that silence was the only language my family spoke fluently. I had just graduated college, debt-free due to 3 scholarships I had hunted down myself. I had a job offer in another state, a starting position at a small firm that would eventually become Northline. "I am moving to Seattle," I announced at dinner. "Oh, that is nice," my father said, passing the potatoes to Tyler. "Hey, did you hear Tyler is thinking about starting a podcast? We are going to convert the garage into a studio for him." They did not ask when I was leaving. They did not ask where I would live. They did not ask if I was scared. They simply assumed I would handle it, just as I had handled my scraped knees, my homework, and my broken heart after my high school sweetheart left. My competence was their convenience. The morning I left was gray and drizzled with rain. My suitcase, a battered thing I had bought from a thrift store for $12, stood by the door. I waited for 10 minutes in the hallway, listening to the house breathe. My parents were awake. I could smell the coffee brewing and hear the low murmur of the television in their bedroom. They knew I was leaving today. I walked to their door and knocked softly. "I am heading out now," I said. "Okay, drive safe." My mother called out through the closed door. "Do not forget to text us." She did not open the door. She did not offer a hug. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. They were not holding back tears. They were simply unbothered. I walked out to the taxi waiting in the rain. I lifted my own bag into the trunk. As the car pulled away, I watched the house shrink in the rear window. No curtains moved, no porch light flickered. I sat in the back of that taxi and made a silent vow. I stopped crying somewhere on the interstate highway. I realized that begging for their gaze was like begging the sun to rise in the west. It was against the laws of their nature. If they could not see me, I would no longer stand in their shadow waiting for a scraps of light. I would go somewhere dark and become the light myself. I would build a life so bright, so undeniable, that their blindness would no longer be my problem. It would be their loss. I do, I said to Mark, my voice ringing clear in the silent hall. I looked past him at the empty seats one last time. They were not reserved for my parents anymore. They were reserved for the girl I used to be, the one who finally stopped waiting and started walking. 2 years had dissolved into the gray, rainy rhythm of the Pacific Northwest, and the silence from my family had hardened from a wound into a scar. At Northline Creative Labs, nobody knew me as the overlooked daughter. I was the director of strategy, the woman who had just engineered the acquisition of a rival firm for $85 million. The conference room was alive with the sound of clinking glass. My team was celebrating, their faces flushed with the adrenaline of a closed deal. I stood by the window, holding a flute of champagne that cost $300 a bottle, looking down at the city traffic. My phone buzzed incessantly on the mahogany table, vibrating with congratulations from industry peers, headhunters, and former professors. I picked it up, scrolling past the professional accolades to the personal tab. It was empty. Curiosity, a habit I had not yet fully broken, led me to open the social media app I rarely used. The algorithm immediately fed me updates from back home. There was a photo of my brother, Tyler, standing in front of a renovated storefront with a "Coming Soon" banner. My mother had captioned it, "So proud of our visionary son. The Brooks family believes in your new organic coffee dream." I zoomed in on the image. I recognized the watch on Tyler's wrist. It was a luxury chronograph, likely retailing for $6,000. I recognized the car in the background, a new SUV that my father had likely co-signed for. The financial picture was crystal clear to me. I spent my days analyzing risk and asset allocation, and what I saw in that photo was a hemorrhage. My parents were pouring their retirement liquidity into a man who had abandoned 3 careers in 5 years. They were stripping the copper wiring out of their future to keep his lights on. I was not angry about the money. I had just received a performance bonus that dwarfed their annual income. I was angry at the erasure. In their narrative, I was the background character, the one who was doing fine and therefore required no maintenance. They assumed I was living in a studio apartment, scraping by, just stable enough not to ask them for help. They liked it that way. It kept the spotlight on Tyler. I locked my phone and left the party early. I had one final errand to run before the day ended. I drove to the waterfront district. The realtor was waiting for me in the lobby of the Summit Tower. The paperwork was already prepared. I sat in the leather chair and signed my name on 30 different pages. The purchase price was $1.2 million. I did not need a mortgage. I paid the closing costs from my personal savings account. When I walked into the unit, the space was empty and echoing. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed the entire sweep of the city skyline and the dark water of the bay. I stood in the center of the living room, feeling the sheer weight of ownership. This was not a gift. This was not a handout. Every square inch of this limestone floor was mine. I took a single photo. It was not a selfie. It was just a picture of my hand holding a set of keys against the backdrop of the glittering city lights. I posted it to my feed with a caption that consisted of 2 words. Finally home. I did not tag anyone. I did not expect a reaction. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the ferries cross the Sound. 10 minutes later, the phone in my pocket buzzed. It was not a notification from a colleague. It was a direct text message from my mother. It was the first time she had initiated a conversation in 14 months. "Is that a hotel key Tyler says that looks like the view from the expensive district?" I stared at the screen. Even now, their imagination could not stretch to include my success. To them, Luxury was something I could only visit, not inhabit. I typed back a response, my thumb hovering over the send button. No. I bought it. I pressed send. The phone went dark. Then, almost immediately, the 3 bubbles of the typing indicator appeared. They appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. The alarm had been tripped. They finally saw me, not because they were looking for their daughter, but because they had just spotted a resource they had left untapped. The phone call came exactly 72 hours after my post. It was my father. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask about the view from my new apartment. He simply said, "We need to have a family meeting. This weekend. It is urgent." I did not ask what was wrong. I knew. The shark had smelled blood in the water. I agreed to come, not because I missed them, but because I needed to see the extent of the rot with my own eyes. I treated it like a site visit for a distressed asset. I booked a flight for Saturday morning, rented a car at the airport, and drove the 40 minutes to the suburb that used to be my entire world. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint was peeling slightly near the gutters, a detail I would have missed before I spent years analyzing property maintenance reports. I walked up the driveway, my heels clicking on the pavement with a sharp military rhythm. I did not knock. I still had a key on my old ring, a rusty piece of brass I had not used in 5 years. I stepped inside. The air smelled of lemon polish and old anxiety. They were waiting for me in the dining room. It did not look like a family gathering. It looked like a bankruptcy hearing. My father sat at the head of the table, his reading glasses perched on his nose. My mother sat to his right, her hands clasped tight enough to turn her knuckles white. Tyler was on the left, looking at his phone, avoiding eye contact. In the center of the table, where the Thanksgiving turkey used to sit, lay a stack of manila folders and a large calculator. "Eleanor," my mother said, her voice tight, "you made it." "I did," I replied. "Sit down," my father commanded, gesturing to the empty chair at the foot of the table. "We have a lot to get through." I looked at the chair. It was the same chair I had sat in when they told me they could not afford my band trip but had just bought Tyler a drum set. It was the seat of the listener, the obedient child, the powerless observer. "I will stand," I said. My father frowned, looking over the rim of his glasses. "This is going to take a while. You should be comfortable." "I am comfortable," I said, crossing my arms. "Start." The power dynamic shifted instantly, by standing. I forced them to look up at me. I loomed over their carefully arranged paperwork. My father cleared his throat, clearly thrown off his script. "Well," he began, tapping a folder. "As you know, the economy has been rough. The family business. The investments, they have taken a hit. We are facing a liquidity crisis." He used the words "we" and "family" as if I had been part of the decision-making process for the last decade. He spoke about market volatility and unexpected expenses. He did not mention the new cars or Tyler's failed ventures. He spoke for 10 minutes without taking a breath, building a wall of jargon to hide the simple truth. "We are consolidating our debts," my mother added, finally looking at me. "We need to pull together. We need to pool our resources to protect the family name." "Protect the name," I repeated flatly. "Or protect the lifestyle, Eleanor." My mother gasped. "That is unfair. We are talking about survival." "I see loan applications here," I said, pointing to a document peeking out from a folder. "And I see a cosigner line highlighted." Tyler finally spoke up. "It is just a bridge loan. L. Just until the coffee shop takes off. I have a solid business plan this time. I need a little runway." I looked at my brother. He was 34 years old and still spoke like a teenager asking for gas money. The audacity was breathtaking. They had ignored my graduation, my promotions, and my wedding, but the moment they suspected I had access to capital, I was suddenly essential. I looked at my father. "You called me here. You demanded I fly across the country. You did not ask about my job. You did not ask about my husband. You did not even offer me a glass of water. You just laid out a spreadsheet. We are family, my father said, his voice hardening. We do not need to stand on ceremony. We need help. And seeing your new apartment, well, it is clear you have done well for yourself. It is time to give back to the people who raised you. The phrase gave back hung in the air like smoke. Why now, I asked. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. Why is today the day you decided I exist? What do you mean? My mother asked, blinking rapidly. I said, leaning forward, resting my hands on the back of the empty chair. I have been gone for years. You did not call when I was promoted. You did not call when I got married. You called 3 days after I bought $1 million property. So tell me the truth. Am I your daughter, or am I your bank? The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of things that could never be unsaid. Tyler's face twisted into a sneer that looked remarkably ugly on a grown man. The mask of the misunderstood artist slipped, revealing the petulant child beneath. He did not look at me with brotherly affection or even desperation. He looked at me with raw, unadulterated envy. You think you are better than us just because you got lucky with some corporate gig, Tyler snapped, his voice cracking slightly. I have been working my tail off trying to build something real, something artistic. You just sit in a glass tower and push paper. You owe me this. You owe us. Luck, I repeated, tasting the word. It was sour. Is that what we are calling 80-hour work weeks and night classes now? We raised you to be generous. Eleanor, my mother interjected, her voice trembling with a manufactured fragility. We put food on the table. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Does that count for nothing? You are acting like a stranger. I am a stranger, I said calmly. But that was your choice, not mine. My father stood up, his face reddening. That is enough. We were there for you. We supported you. When? I asked. The single word landed like a stone in a still pond. Be specific. Were you there when I won the state debate championship? No. You were at Tyler's Battle of the Bands. Were you there when I was hospitalized for appendicitis in college? No. You said gas was too expensive to drive up, but you bought Tyler a new guitar the next week. Were you there when I got married? No. There were 2 empty chairs in the front row that cost me $300. The room seemed to tilt. For years, the gravity of this house had pulled everything toward Tyler. Every resource, every emotion, every dollar had orbited him. But now, the mass had shifted. I was the one with the gravity now. I saw them look at each other, a flicker of panic in their eyes. They realized that their usual currency guilt and obligation had no value here. I had not brought the currency they expected. You are being incredibly selfish, my mother hissed, dropping the fragile act. You are sitting on a pile of money, living in a luxury apartment, watching your own brother drown. What kind of sister does that? The kind who learned to swim because nobody threw her a life vest, I replied. I looked at the spreadsheet again. The numbers were damning. They had not just supported Tyler, they had cannibalized their own security to fund his delusions. They had taken out a second mortgage. They had drained their 401k accounts, and now they wanted me to pour my concrete foundation into their sinkhole. I did not scream. I did not cry. I felt a strange, icy clarity. This was a business meeting, after all. I will ask you one question, I said, looking directly at my father. Forget that I am your daughter. Forget the emotional blackmail. Give me one logical financial reason why I should invest $100,000 into a business run by a man who has never turned a profit in his life. Show me the return on investment. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Tyler. Tyler looked at the floor. Because we are family, my mother cried out, but her voice lacked conviction. It was a slogan, not an argument. That is not a business plan, I said. And frankly, given your track record of investing in me versus him, the family argument is the weakest one you have. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a bluff being called. They had nothing. No plan, no logic, no genuine love to leverage. They only had needs, and they had assumed I would be too desperate for their approval to notice the bad deal they were offering. They were wrong. I reached into my leather briefcase. The zipper made a sharp, tearing sound in the quiet room. My parents leaned forward, their eyes hungry, expecting a checkbook or a bank transfer authorization. Tyler actually licked his lips. They thought the negotiation was over, and they had won simply by being pathetic. I pulled out a thick document bound in heavy blue paper and slid it across the mahogany table, covering their frantic spreadsheet of debts. "What is this?" my father asked, his hand hovering over the cover. "It is a deed of trust," I said, my voice steady and professional. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, I have established a permanent endowment fund. It is called the Mrs. Vance Emerging Artist Grant." "Who is Mrs. Vance?" Tyler asked, squinting at the legal text. "She was the art teacher in 11th grade who paid for my lunch when you forgot to give me money for 2 weeks because you were saving for Tyler's guitar lessons," I replied. "She was the one who told me I had value when this house told me I was invisible." My mother looked up, her face pale. "I do not understand. What does this have to do with us?" "Everything," I said. "You asked for money. You said you needed resources to support the arts." I listened. "This fund is legally structured to provide full tuition and living expenses for underprivileged students who have talent but no support system. The initial endowment is $500,000. The number hung in the air. $500,000. I saw the calculation happen behind my father's eyes. He realized that the money he needed to save his dignity was sitting right there, locked inside a legal fortress he could not breach. $500,000, my father whispered. "You have $500,000 to give away to strangers, while your family is drowning." "It is not giving away," I corrected him. "It is an investment, and it is irrevocable. The money has already left my accounts. Even if I wanted to help you now, I could not. The Board of Trustees controls it, and I made sure the bylaws specifically exclude any applicants with the last name Brooks." Tyler stood up so fast his chair fell backward with a crash. The mask of the victim vanished instantly, replaced by a contorted rage that was terrifyingly familiar. He slammed his hands on the table. "You bitch!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You did this on purpose. You came here to wave it in our faces. That is my money. That is my inheritance. You are throwing away." "It is not your inheritance," I said, not flinching. "It is my earnings. There is a difference." "I will sue you," Tyler shouted, lunging forward until my father grabbed his arm. "I will tell everyone what a cold-hearted snake you are. I will ruin your reputation." My mother was sobbing now. A theatrical, heaving cry. "How could you, Eleanor? We are your flesh and blood." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen and turned it around so they could see the red pulsing light of the recording app. It had been running since I walked through the door. "Sit down, Tyler," I said. The command was sharp enough to make him freeze. "Every word of this meeting has been recorded. The emotional blackmail, the admission of your financial mismanagement, and now, the threats of defamation and physical intimidation." The room went deadly silent. Tyler looked at the phone as if it were a loaded gun. "If you attempt to smear my name," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, hard register, "or if you try to contact my employer, or if you show up at my home, I will release this recording to every investor and creditor you are currently trying to court. I will expose exactly why the Brooks family is bankrupt. I will show them that it is not the economy. It is incompetence." My father sank back into his chair, looking suddenly very old. He knew he had lost. He knew that the narrative he had controlled for 30 years, the story of the loving family and the difficult daughter, was over. I had the truth, and I had the receipts. I picked up my briefcase. I did not ask for a hug. I did not say goodbye. I simply turned my back on the people who had turned their backs on me 1,000 times. "Do not call me," I said as I walked to the door. "The next time you hear from a Brooks, it will be my lawyer." I walked out of the house and down the driveway. I did not run. I walked with the measured pace of someone who had nothing left to fear. Behind me, the house was silent, a tomb of their own making. I got into my rental car, started the engine, and drove away without checking the rearview mirror. I had already seen everything I needed to see. The backlash began as a ripple in the small pond of our hometown before turning into a riptide that dragged my family under. They attempted to control the narrative the old-fashioned way. My mother wept at her book club about my cruelty, painting a portrait of a daughter who had lost her way. My father hinted to his golf buddies that I had been brainwashed by the coastal elite, claiming I had forgotten the values they instilled in me. They tried to weaponize the community against me, reaching out to my old high school acquaintances and distant cousins to plead their case. However, they forgot that the internet has a memory, and it is ruthless. It started with a local blog post about the Mrs. Vance Emerging Artist Grant. The journalist, a sharp young woman who had actually done her research, noted the peculiar name of the scholarship. She dug into the archives. She found the wedding registry from 6 months ago. She found the photos of the ceremony that Mark had posted on his public profile. The image of the 2 empty chairs with the reserved signs became a topic of discussion on the local town forum. It was not the condemnation of me that my parents expected. Instead, the comment section filled with questions that cut deeper than any insult. One user asked why the parents were absent from the wedding if they were so devoted. Another user, a former classmate of mine, commented that she remembered me working 3 jobs in high school while my brother drove a convertible. The narrative flipped overnight. My parents were not seen as victims of an ungrateful child. They were exposed as negligent gardeners who were furious that the flower they refused to water had bloomed in someone else's yard. I maintained a discipline of absolute silence. I blocked their numbers. I filtered their emails into a folder I never opened. When a reporter from my hometown paper reached out for a comment regarding the rumors of a family feud, I responded with a single, carefully drafted sentence. My focus is entirely on honoring the educators who supported me when I had no other resources. That quote ran on the front page of the lifestyle section. It was a diplomatic way of saying I had been an orphan in my own home. The fund itself exploded in popularity. It turned out that my story resonated with thousands of people who felt unseen by their own blood. Donations poured in from strangers, amounts ranging from $10 to $500. By the end of the first month, the endowment had grown by $75,000. My colleagues at Northline Creative Labs formed a phalanx around me. When Tyler tried to harass me on a professional networking site, leaving manic comments about stolen inheritance on my business posts, my team did not wait for me to ask for help. Our legal department sent a cease and desist letter within 4 hours. My assistant scrubbed his comments and flagged his account for harassment. My parents and brother were losing their social standing day by day. They were uninvited from the annual charity gala in their town. Not explicitly, but the invitation simply never arrived. The bank where my father had bragged about his successful children denied Tyler's latest loan application, citing a lack of collateral and the precarious state of my parents' own finances. They were learning a harsh lesson in modern economics. Reputation is an asset, and they had just defaulted. They stood in the wreckage of their own expectations, waiting for a bailout that was never coming. The truth was not something I had to shout from the rooftops. I just had to step out of the way and let it run its course. The silence in my apartment should have been victorious, but late at night, when the city lights below blurred into streaks of gold and red, it felt heavy. I found myself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m, wrestling with a ghost named guilt. Had I gone too far? Was the recording too calculating? Was the public humiliation of my parents a necessary defense or an act of cruelty? The indoctrination of 3 decades does not vanish just because you sign a deed of trust. The voice in my head still sounded like my mother, telling me I was cold, unfeeling, and selfish. That voice was silenced on a Tuesday afternoon in the conference room of Northline Creative Labs. I was there to meet the first recipient of the Mrs. Vance Emerging Artist Grant. Her name was Chloe, a 19-year-old digital illustrator from a rural town in eastern Washington. She walked in clutching a portfolio case that was clearly taped together at the corners. She wore a coat that was 2 sizes too big, likely a hand-me-down. When she sat across from me, she could barely make eye contact. I opened her portfolio. The work was breathtaking raw, vivid, and screaming with a talent that had clearly grown in the cracks of a concrete pavement. "Your work is incredible, Chloe," I said gently. She looked up, her eyes wide. "My parents, well, they said art is a hobby. They said I should learn to do hair or work at the plant like my brother. They said they wouldn't pay a dime for art school." The air left my lungs. It was like looking into a time machine. I saw myself at 19, sitting at a kitchen table, being told that my dreams were too expensive while my brother's mistakes were simply overhead costs. "Well," I said, sliding the acceptance letter across the glass table, "they do not have to pay. The tuition is covered. The housing is covered. All you have to do is paint." Chloe read the letter. Her hand started to shake. She looked at me, and tears spilled over without a sound. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." "I know you," I said, my voice thick with emotion I usually kept locked away. "I was you." In that moment, the guilt evaporated. I realized that setting a boundary with my family was not an act of war. It was an act of rescue. By refusing to sink my resources into the black hole of my brother's incompetence, I had saved this girl. I had repurposed the pain. That night, I sat on the balcony with Mark. We were drinking a bottle of wine that cost $40, watching the ferries cross the Sound. I felt bad for them for a moment, I admitted. But seeing Chloe today, it clarified things. Mark took my hand. "You did not break this family, Eleanor. You just stopped being the glue that held the broken pieces together. That is not the same thing." He was right. I had spent my life trying to earn a seat at a table where I was only served scraps. It was time to build my own table. We started a new tradition that Sunday. We invited 3 friends over my assistant, a former professor, and a colleague from the strategy department. There was no agenda. There was no drama. We cooked a roast chicken and sat around the kitchen island for 4 hours, laughing until our sides hurt. Nobody asked for money. Nobody made backhanded compliments. We celebrated each other's small wins. This was family. It was chosen, not inherited, and it was stronger for it. Before I went to bed, I picked up my phone. I navigated to the settings of my family group chat, the one where my mother was currently posting vague, passive-aggressive quotes about forgiveness and blood ties. I did not just mute it. I selected the option to leave the conversation. A prompt popped up. "Are you sure you want to leave?" I pressed. "Yes." The chat disappeared. The thread was gone. I put the phone on the nightstand and turned off the lights. For the first time in 32 years, I was not waiting for a notification. I was just sleeping. I needed the rest. The final meeting was coming, and this time, I would not be walking in as a daughter seeking approval. I would be walking in as a stranger closing a deal. I chose a hotel lobby in the downtown district for our final meeting. It was a neutral zone, populated by businessmen in transit and tourists studying maps, a place where raised voices would attract security and public scenes were discouraged. I arrived 15 minutes early and ordered a black coffee. I did not order for them. When my parents walked in, they looked out of place against the modern, sterile decor. My father's shoulders were slumped, and my mother wore a scarf I recognized from 10 years ago, wrapped tightly around her neck as if to hold herself together. They sat down opposite me. The low glass table between us felt like a canyon. "Thank you for seeing us, Eleanor," my father said, his voice lacking its usual boom. He sounded tired. We have been doing a lot of thinking." "I am sure you have," I replied, keeping my hands folded on the table. The bank rejected the refinancing application. Didn't they? My mother flinched. This is not about the bank. This is about our family. We realized we have made mistakes. We were so focused on helping Tyler find his footing that well, we took you for granted, and for that. We are sorry. It was the apology I had fantasized about for 2 decades. Hearing it now, in this cold, air-conditioned lobby, I felt nothing. It was like receiving a package in the mail 5 years after you moved out of the house. The contents were no longer useful. You didn't just take me for granted. I corrected them, my tone clinical. You used my neglect to fund his indulgence, but I am not here to argue the past. You asked for a meeting to discuss a path forward. I have brought my terms. Terms? My mother asked, blinking. We are family, Eleanor. We don't need contracts. We absolutely need contracts, I said, because family has clearly meant different things to us. If you want a relationship with me, here is what happens. First, you stop all financial support to Tyler immediately. No rent, no car payments, no bailouts. He gets a job, or he figures it out. Second, you will never ask me for money again. Not for a loan, not for an emergency. Third, we go to family therapy with a counselor of my choosing, once a month, to discuss why you felt comfortable erasing one child to idolize another. I watched their faces. I watched the hope curdle into panic. They looked at each other, engaging in that silent, telepathic conversation they had perfected over 30 years. Eleanor, be reasonable, my father said, leaning forward. He is not like you. He is going through a very dark time right now. If we cut him off, he will be on the street. We cannot just abandon him. You abandoned me, I said. I left home at 18 with 2 suitcases, and I never asked you for a dime. I worked in a cafeteria. I lived in a basement. I survived. Why is he incapable of the same? He is sensitive, my mother cried out, her voice rising enough to turn a few heads at the nearby tables. He is an artist. He is not built for the corporate world like you. You are strong, Eleanor. You can handle the world. He needs us. There it was. The truth, stripped of all the polite decoration. They did not want to change. They wanted me to accept the status quo. They were addicted to the dynamic. They needed Tyler to be helpless so they could feel needed, and they needed me to be strong so they didn't have to worry. They were not parents, they were enablers, and my brother was their drug of choice. He needs you because you crippled him, I said. I stood up. I did not touch my coffee. Where are you going? My father asked, panic edging into his voice. We haven't settled anything. We can compromise. Maybe just partial support for him. There is no compromise, I said. I gave you a choice. You could have a daughter, or you could have a dependent. You chose the dependent, again. Eleanor, please. My mother reached out, her hand hovering over the space where my arm had been a second before. It is Christmas in 2 months. Just come home. We can talk about this without the ultimatums. I am home, I said, looking down at them. I have a home. I have a family. And neither of them includes people who require me to be small so someone else can feel big. I picked up my purse. I did not feel the crushing weight of sadness I expected. I felt light. I felt like a diver who had finally cut the anchor chain and was shooting toward the surface. Goodbye, I said. I turned and walked toward the revolving doors. I heard my mother call my name once. A sharp, desperate sound. But I did not slow down. I did not look back to see if they were crying. I stepped out into the city street, where the air was cold and clean, and for the first time in my life, I did not wonder if they were watching me leave. I simply did not care. 6 months after walking out of that hotel lobby, I stood on a stage that was illuminated by 100 spotlights. The grand ballroom of the convention center was sold out. There were 500 plates set for dinner, And as I looked out into the cavernous room, I noticed the one detail that mattered most to me. There was not a single empty seat. Every chair was filled with donors, artists, scholarship recipients, and friends. In the front row, right where my parents should have been in another life, sat Mark. Next to him was Chloe, the first student we had sponsored, and next to her was my old team from Northline. I did not scan the back of the room looking for late arrivals. I did not feel the phantom ache of absence. The ghosts of the reserved signs at my wedding had finally been exorcised by the presence of people who actually wanted to be here. I stepped up to the microphone. The room hushed instantly. The silence was not heavy or awkward. It was respectful. It was the sound of people waiting to listen. "Welcome," I said, my voice projecting clear and strong to the back of the hall. "Tonight is not about looking back at the obstacles we faced. It is about looking at who we can become when someone finally hands us a tool and says, 'I see you.'" For a long time, I believed that validation was a limited resource. I thought it was something you had to beg for, something that was hoarded by the people who were supposed to love you. I paused, letting the words land. I was wrong. I continued. Value does not come from being chosen by others. It does not come from inheriting a legacy or being the favorite. Value comes from the moment you decide to choose yourself. Tonight. We are here to make sure that the next generation of artists knows they do not have to wait for permission to be great. We are giving them the platform they already deserve. The applause that followed was not polite. It was thunderous. It washed over me, warm and genuine. As the ovation continued, a brief image flashed in my mind, faint and fading like a Polaroid left in the sun. I saw a house in the suburbs with peeling paint. I saw my brother, Tyler, now forced to work a manual labor job because the safety net had finally snapped. I saw my parents sitting in a quiet, shrinking living room, surrounded by the silence they had purchased with their neglect. They were not villains to me anymore. They were simply people I used to know. They were characters in a prequel that I rarely thought about. Their power over me had evaporated the moment I stopped hoping they would change. I walked off the stage and Mark was there to take my hand. We moved through the crowd, shaking hands and discussing the future of the foundation. I was no longer Eleanor, the invisible daughter, nor was I Eleanor, the ATM. I was the architect of my own reality. I realized then that the ultimate revenge was not destroying them. It was not screaming at them or suing them. It was this. It was being so full of life, so consumed by purpose and joy, that I no longer had the mental space to hold a grudge. I had walked away from the table where I was starving, and I had built a banquet hall where everyone was fed. I stepped out into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling above me. I did not look back. There was nothing behind me but lessons learned. The future was wide open, and for the first time in 32 years, I was exactly where I belonged. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from, as I would love to connect and hear your thoughts on the situation. Do not forget to subscribe to Mira Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.